We begin this hour at the Pentagon. That's where the vice president has just sworn in General Mattis, General Mad Dog, James Mad Dog Mattis, as Secretary of Defense. The president has also just signed an executive order that would essentially ban refugees from several Middle Eastern countries from entering the United States. That's a campaign promise that President Trump is keeping. RT correspondent Simone Del Rosario is at the Pentagon with more for us. Simone, tell us a little more about what just happened.
Manila, President Donald Trump just signed 2 executive orders here at the Pentagon. The first one was about rebuilding the military and rebuilding of all of the armed services. Now, while President Trump was short on details on what this executive order entails, he said that they would be building and buying new planes, ships, and resources for the military. We also expect the military size to increase in that as well. The second executive order is the one that is much more controversial. That is processing new vetting measures he called to keep terrorists out of the United States. The exact name of this executive order is the Protection of the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States. So again, the details on this very short, but there have been some draft executive orders that have been released through the media over the past couple of days. What we expect from this executive order is that it would have a temporary ban on refugees from entering the United States. The time right now unclear. I don't want to speculate before we get the actual executive order in our hands. But this halt on refugees, it comes from Muslim-dominant countries. It would also keep any entry from 7 countries, and that is Iraq, Syria, Iran, Sudan, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen. So keep people from entering the United States from those countries. He also calls for a tougher vetting process, but as you know, the United States has one of the toughest vetting processes in the world. So those are the 2 executive orders that Donald Trump called for today that he signed after General Mattis was sworn in as Secretary of Defense. After Vice President Pence swore him in, Donald Trump took to the stage and said that Mattis is a man of action, and actually after he signed the executive order for rebuilding the military, he gave that pen that he used to sign the executive order over to now Secretary of Defense Mattis. One of the things that people expect that Donald Trump also did while he was here, it was not an executive order, but it was a presidential directive to Secretary Mattis to come up with a more aggressive plan to strike the Islamic State. What that means, we still don't know, but we know that he's giving his commanders about a month to come up with something different, and we expect that means much more strikes from the air. We know that during President Trump's campaign, he alluded to striking ISIS a lot more to get rid of the terrorist group. Manila?
All right, thank you so much for that. RT correspondent Simone Del Rosario over at the Pentagon. Now, to discuss the impacts of this order on immigrants and refugees, I'm being joined now by Fahad Ahmed, Executive Director of DRUM. That means Desist, Rising Up and Moving, a group advocating for the rights of South Asian immigrants, undocumented workers as well. Fahad, thank you for being with us today. As someone who has worked for several years in targeted immigrant communities, what is the current reaction so far to President Trump's orders?
The reaction is very much of outrage and real concern for the well-being of all of our communities. Obviously, first and foremost, the concern is for the immigrants, the refugees, the asylum seekers that are now going to be prevented from being able to find safety or be able to come and join their families and or their loved ones. At least we're still waiting on kind of what the final list is. In the last minutes, there was some debate about whether additional countries will be added on. But at least 3 of those countries, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, are currently in the middle of very extreme conflicts, and many of the people from those countries are seeking refuge or seeking safety. But then there's also the concern for the communities here. The families of those people and those families that are now going to be kept apart, the communities are going to be kept apart. But just the very notion, the very premise of the executive order is that we're going to keep immigrants and refugees out, essentially making a direct correlation between refugees, immigrants, and terrorism. And that has an impact here locally and domestically because it provides an official stamp that Muslim communities, communities from these countries are legitimized as targets to be suspicious of. And that's what directly leads to increased police surveillance, increased targeting by immigration and police, and hate crimes. And we've been seeing that just kind of throughout the election rhetoric, and we've been seeing that increase literally within this last week. An incident in JFK yesterday, an incident in Maryland or Virginia as well yesterday.
And can you further explain the impacts on how this ban on the Syrian refugees will affect? I mean, you touched on it, but explain to us in detail what the refugees who are fleeing war-torn countries, legitimately war-torn countries and terrorism, what will this do to them, including the children and the families? What will happen to them? Where will they go? Where will they be stuck?
Well, I think we're still waiting to see some of the details of what's in the order. In one of the previous drafts, they said that they would create safe zones inside of Syria where people could stay, and then they would do the processing from there, which is just absolutely absurd and I think indicative of the lack of any thoughtfulness or competence, frankly, from this administration. It's not possible to have those types of safe zones in the midst of a war in Syria. And so what it will mean is either people will remain stuck in Syria or they will be stuck in refugee camps in one of the surrounding countries, living in a life of misery, continuing to face deprivation and the violence that just comes with the life of refugees. And there they will just be stuck in limbo. As it was mentioned, America already has one of the harshest vetting processes for refugees, which takes up to 2 years. And so now these people will be stuck in limbo indefinitely.
And Amnesty International has said that President Trump's order is, quote, scapegoating the refugees in the guise of national security, and that it actually violates international law. Do you think that a legal challenge is possible then?
I think for that, I would defer more to the lawyers that are very much experienced in international law and refugee law. But the conversations within with colleagues has very much been that there would be potential to have legal challenges. One in both in violation of international law, and then secondly also there was some talk that they would create exceptions for Christian refugees, and so there may also be some violations based on discriminatory applications of the orders as well.
And now, as you already mentioned, you touched on this, that it's already incredibly difficult to get a visa or to immigrate here to the United States. How will this order further impact not only those seeking refugee status to the U.S., but what about those people who already have families here and they're now being broken up and kept apart?
So I think if you mean by people that have some of the family here and they're trying to rejoin their families, those families will be prevented from being able to rejoin. And that's all sorts of families. Whether they're like immediate blood families, but also just larger communities. Oftentimes refugees go where there are previous existing neighbors, friends, families. And so like communities will continue to be kept apart and be torn apart. But there's also, as I mentioned earlier, there will also be an impact on the communities that are just already here, that they will come under further scrutiny and they will come under further suspicion. We can, without a doubt, see an escalation in hate crimes and marginalization, in the targeting of those communities. Already the right wing, in several states has been talking about not accepting refugees or forcing the refugees to leave their states. There will be effects on the communities, even the ones that are already here.
And how would you suggest that the communities that are already here combat this narrative?
The combating a narrative makes sense when we're trying to think of reasonable people. With this administration, these are just not reasonable people. Their minds cannot be changed with alternative narratives. I think as communities, though, we do need to continue to build relationships across other communities, those that are already willing allies and partners, and then engaging with other communities who are kind of lost in the middle in this very polarized landscape. to really be able to share, like, these are what our experiences are. This is why we are here. And, in partnership with those communities, speak out, continue to agitate. We see at this moment, this administration is bringing attacks on multiple communities across the board: women, African American communities, immigrant communities, Latino communities, Muslim communities. And so these are opportunities for us to really build bridges across those communities, to really build a collective movement that is able to not only to be able to fight back, but be able to protect each other, support each other, and build bonds across each other.
I think that is the best takeaway there. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. Fahad Ahmed, Executive Director of Desist Rising Up and Moving. Thank you.